Alright, so we're going to finish histology talking about epithelial tissues, epithelial cells. Your epithelium, it's there to protect, it's there to secrete, absorb, excrete, and it just separates the inside from the outside. And so when you look at it, you're going to find it covering the body surfaces. It's going to be lining your organs like your intestines, your stomach, your blood vessels. These are all lined with epithelium. Your skin is lined with epithelium. The inside of your mouth is lined with epithelium. And so it's really going to be separating that inside from outside. And it also makes up your glands. So your sweat glands, digestive glands, that kind of stuff is lined with epithelium. So when we're looking at epithelium, we're going to notice a couple things. One, it lacks blood vessels. So looking at this up here, this is your epidermis. In this epithelial layer, you don't see any blood vessels. You don't have blood vessels in epithelium because their job, what they're there for, is to separate stuff, to stop stuff from coming through. And so if you have holes in it that allow blood vessels or nerves in, well, now you just made a gap. And so you're no longer sealing the inside from the outside. These cells are tightly packed together, so you can see how they're just holding on really tight to each other. And they replicate really quick, because if something happens and you get damaged and you get a hole, well, you really want to repair that hole fast. And so these cells quickly repair themselves even though they don't have blood vessels. So they tend to have a basement membrane down here that does have blood vessels, so they're going to be associated with different types of connective tissues that have a lot of blood flow to them, so they can quickly repair. When we're classifying and naming our epithelium, we use two major characteristics. One is the number of layers they have, and two is the shape of the cell. So on the first one, if you only have one layer of cells, you are a simple epithelium. So that nuclei is just going to be one cell above a basement membrane. You see these lining internal compartments, so a lot of the membranes, like your parietal peritoneum, will be a simple epithelium. The lining of the blood vessels is a simple epithelium. And also in things that need to secrete and absorb, so in the alveoli of the lungs, you have one layer of simple squamous epithelium. If you're not simple, if you have more than one layer, then you're going to be stratified. So if you have more than one layer, you're going to be stratified. So you have strata, right? Layers. If you look at the side of a mountain that has been cut, you can see different layers going. Those layers are called strata. And in our epithelium, we use the same terms to refer to more than one layer as stratified. You can find stratified epithelium mainly in places that need protection, places where you're going to have abrasion. So the first one we're going to talk about is squamous epithelium. When you look at squamous epithelium, they're going to be very thin cells. Squamous means scale-like. So if you think of the group called lizards, they're called squamates. Squamates because they have scales. And so squamous epithelium is going to be a very thin, irregular shaped cell. So if you're looking down top onto them, they kind of fit together really tight, but they don't have a regular shape. If you look at them in cross-section, this would be a layer of simple squamous epithelium. This is in the lining of the lungs. You can see it's just a very thin line of epithelium all around there. The nuclei to these guys, especially when they're simple, they're going to seem kind of squished. And so if you look at it from the side, It'll be this very flat type of cell. And when you look at the nucleus, it is also going to be very flat. All right, so we're going to find it in the lungs. You're going to find it lining your blood vessels, your lymphatic vessels, forming the membranes of the body cavities. You can also find it in the kidneys, in this area called the glomerulus. We'll talk about a little bit more in detail when we get to the urinary system near the end of the semester. So you have simple squamous, these really just one layer of these thin flat cells, and then we have stratified squamous. So stratified squamous is going to be in areas that need protection. So you're going to see it forming the epidermis of the skin. That's what this is showing, is the epidermis of the skin. And it can either be keratinized or non-keratinized. Keratin is a type of protein that helps to protect the skin. And so your skin on your arm is keratinized. So this stratified squamous is keratinized. But you also have stratified squamous in your mouth, and that is non-keratinized. So you can touch the inside of your mouth, and it doesn't feel the same as your skin because of the keratin that went in. Keratin's also the stuff that makes your hair. It's the stuff that makes your fingernails. So it's this really tough protein that adds protection to your skin. And when you look at this, you can see there are a ton of layers. So here's a couple layers right here, and then it goes all the way down. Here are a couple layers up here, and goes all the way down. All the way down. With any of your stratified epithelium, we always name it based on what this apical or this top layer of cells look like. So looking up here, they're going to be these really flat, irregular shaped cells. But if you go down, these cells almost look like columns or maybe even cubes. But it's not stratified cuboidal because we name it for the apical layer. So here again, we can look and you can see your simple squamous looking down on top of them like this. Just one thin layer. And then your stratified squamous, many layers. But we name it for this top layer, right? The superficial cells are squamous, even though these basal cells look kind of cuboidal. Which is the next epithelium we're going to talk about. So simple cuboidal epithelium. For your cuboidal epithelium, that shape is going to be kind of like a cube. These look almost round. Those look kind of cubish. These look kind of cubish. So it's looking kind of like a cube. And the big thing is it's about as tall as it is wide. And that nucleus is going to be in the center of the cell. And it's going to be nice and round. You're going to find cuboidal cells lining ducts. So salivary ducts, digestive ducts, sweat gland ducts, sebaceous gland ducts. You find them a lot in the kidneys, in the kidney tubules, in your thyroid glands. You have these colloid-filled follicles, which kind of look like pink balloons, and around them are going to be these cuboidal cells. Really good at secretion and absorption. So for a lot of your glands, you're going to have cuboidal cells associated with them. Stratified cuboidal is pretty rare. You're only going to find it lining some of the really big ducts. So in your mammary glands, those ducts you'll have some. In your salivary glands, especially in your really large salivary glands, like your parotid salivary glands, these ones down here, you might see too. So if you look at that basal layer, it looks almost squamous, like it's pretty squished. But then that apical layer looks as tall as it is wide with a nice round nucleus. So it is stratified cuboidal. Then we get to one that is stratified but doesn't really fit a shape. And it's called transitional because its function is to transition. So with your transitional epithelium, it goes from being kind of a loose blobby. So if you look, you can see these have very nice round edges to being very flat. Transitional epithelium is great at stretching or distension. And so you're going to find transitional epithelium in places that need to stretch, like the uterus or the bladder. And so they're able to stretch out when it starts to fill up. So if you have a baby in the uterus, it's just going to keep stretching and stretching and stretching. If your bladder starts getting full, it starts to stretch. And again, when we talk about the urinary system, we'll talk about some sensors that you have in those muscles, in the detrusors muscles, that recognize that stretch and then tell you that, oh, you need to pee. But stuff to come. Transitional, you can see it's stratified. The cells are kind of roundish. And that's about it for transitional. Then we get to columnar. So these cells are going to look like columns. You can see they're much taller than they are wide. The nucleus tends to be down at the bottom or at near the basal edge of the cell. And so your simple columnar, just one layer of these column-like cells. You find this lining your digestive tracts. You can find some of it in the uterus. They contain microvilli, and so if you look on this edge, you can kind of see like a pink fuzz. That's going to be the microvilli. They're just these little bitty finger-like projections coming off the cell to increase the surface area so you can get more absorption into the intestines. Typically, you'll find goblet cells in here. There's not one pictured in this section, but they're like cells that secrete mucus. And so you'll find your columnar secreting digestive fluids and absorbing nutrients. Stratified columnar is also rare, like stratified cuboid. You're not going to find in a lot of places. But again, the superficial cells, taller than they are wide. Sometimes you can see the nuclei get stretched up, while the bottom or that basal layer looks more cuboidal, but we name it for the apical layer. And so this is stratified columnar. You can find it in the male urethra, vas deferens, and maybe sometimes in the pharynx, which is that area behind the mouth. Then the last type we're going to talk about is pseudostratified epithelium. Pseudo, like pseudopod, means fake. And so this is fake stratified columnar epithelium. So it's actually a simple type of epithelium. But if you look, it has nuclei at various heights instead of like your simple columnar where they're all just at the basal layer. This has them spread out across multiple heights. And so it looks like there's more than one layer. It looks like there's maybe 2 or 3 layers here. But there's not. It's only one. This typically has cilia. So if you look, this is a much taller kind of pink mohawk. These cilia beat together, kind of like people rowing a boat, and it helps to move stuff across the surface of this cell. So we find it in the respiratory tract, moving dust particles or anything else up and out of the respiratory passageways. You also find it in the reproductive system, helping to move sperm or eggs to their location. And that's it for our different types of epithelium. But we also have glandular epithelium. This is just going to be epithelium that you find associated with your glands. So we have 2 major gland types. You have endocrine glands and exocrine glands. Endocrine glands do not have a duct. So there's no tube leading anywhere. You have this gland, and it secretes its hormone, and then that hormone gets into the blood supply and gets circulated. Exocrine glands have a duct, and those ducts empty onto an epithelial surface. So your sweat glands, your sebaceous glands will secrete onto your skin. Your salivary glands will secrete into your mouth. Your digestive glands will secrete into your digestive system. On your exocrine, the first one we're going to talk about are merocrine glands. It's the most common. You find lots of different merocrine glands. When they secrete whatever they're secreting, they don't lose any part of the cell. So it's just exocytosis of this fluid that they're releasing. It can be serose, so it can be really watery. An example of a merocrine serose would be like your lacrimal glands, the ones that make your tears. Lots of enzymes in there that get secreted. Or you can have mucus ones, like what makes mucus in your nose is a type of a merocrine gland. Your sweat glands that you associate with like your arm is also a merocrine gland or an ecrine gland. And then we have apocrine glands. When they do it, apo kind of makes me think of like apoptosis or programmed cell death. So these apocrine glands actually lose a little bit of the cell during the secretion. Apocrine glands tend to release like a thicker, milkier, or protein-rich sweat. Examples of these would be the mammary glands that secrete milk. They're a type of apocrine gland. Another type would be the sweat glands that you have in your armpits. Around the axillary and genital regions are apocrine glands. These are the glands that whenever you get nervous, they start secreting sweat. And we'll talk more about apocrine glands when we get into the integumentary system later this week. And then we have holocrine glands. Holocrine glands, the entire cell explodes to release the cell product. An example of this would be like a sebaceous gland, so the oil glands that you have on your skin are typically associated with hair. Another type would be the cells that secrete earwax, your cerumen glands. Those cells explode to create this earwax. So for your holocrine glands, they make a lot of oily, fatty releases. So if you look at them, here you can see a merocrine gland, and this one is in the pancreas. And you see when it secretes, it just secretes out exocytosis and these vesicles that go and do the thing. With your apocrine, like this mammary gland, you can see bits of the cell actually get broke off. And then here in holocrine, the entire cell disintegrates, and then a new cell divides to replace it. So you have a layer of cells down here that are dividing, and these cells are exploding. Very cool. And with that, we are finally done with histology. And so if you don't know anything, ask. That's what I'm here for.